Good afternoon, everybody. Super nice to see you all. I got a diverse crowd, names I'm seeing from various different classes from the past, and different groups of students and different groups of people I've never met, and this is very exciting. Welcome to the 7th event in the 2021 Music Matters series, and Music Matters is the home lecture series of the Popular Music, Sound, and Media Cultures BA, MA, and PhD program in the Arts, Culture, and Media Department at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And today's presentation is also a co-presentation of the IASPM, the International Association for the Study of Popular Music Benelux chapter. It's the 6th event in our Pop Talks series. And my name is Dr. Chris Tonelli. I'm one of 6 music professors in the program in Groningen. And I'm going to give the floor now to my colleague, Dr. Melanie Schiller, who's going to introduce our speakers for today.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks very much. And well, nice to see some of you and many familiar names, especially hello to the people from Music, Politics and Resistance, a course that I'm currently teaching, and where we actually discuss protest music today. And one of them, the cases that we discussed was actually Pussy Riot that we just saw also. So very fitting. Nice to see everyone. Yeah, it is my honor to introduce the speakers of today. We have Elisa Gaufman, who is an assistant professor of Russian discourse and politics in the Department of European Languages and Cultures here at the University of Groningen. Her research is situated at the intersection of political theory, international relations, and media and cultural studies. She is the author of Security Threats and Public Perception, Digital Russia and the Ukraine Crisis. And I know Elisa very well since we've recently co-organized a lecture series on popular culture and populism. So I'm very excited to see or hear something about your own research today. The second speaker today is Anatoly Reshetnikov. He is an assistant professor of international relations at Webster University in Vienna. He holds a PhD in political science from Central European University, and he also serves as associate editor of New Perspectives, interdisciplinary journal of Central and Eastern European politics and international relations. His research interests include conceptual history, discourse analysis, Russia's international politics, and critical theory. And of course, about the latter, at least we will hear something more today in their talk titled Juxtapose à la Russe, Rancière and the Meta-Modernist Turn in Contemporary Russian Music. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this somewhat rainy afternoon, at least here in Groningen. We prepared a little playlist for the audience, so when you actually, when we talk about the stuff that we're talking about, you can actually check back and see what exactly we're talking about, what music videos we're discussing today. So you can save that playlist for later and check back on the videos and artists that we're discussing today. But right now, I'm just going to share our slides. 1 second. There we go. I hope everyone can see it. Yeah, so just a little bit right off the bat, we're not presenting all 3 authors of the article that we wrote. So actually, there's 3 of us who wrote the piece. So Anatoly is here today. Vyacheslav is actually in the audience, and I'm here talking to you right now. So just to jump right in, probably the song that you probably heard when you came into the virtual room and was a reference to the NWA's song Fuck the Police. That actually was a direct indictment of the American police system and brutality and racial profiling that a lot of people are still dealing with right now if you follow the Black Lives Matter movement. So the song actually was censored, and even the FBI complained about its existence because it was obviously very much critical of the justice system in the US. But when we actually moved to the Russian context, the kind of the more direct indictment, the kind of the fuck the police à la Russe was probably Pussy Riot as the best example of it, because in Russia we're dealing with obviously an authoritarian system, shrinking public space and censorship, where it's actually not really easy to say fuck the police anymore, even if there is problem with the police. And a lot of these kind of things that Pussy Riot also indicted in many ways, the kind of anti-Westernism, the resorting back to traditional values, persecution of LGBTQ community, and even feminism. So these are the kind of things that were definitely very much on the agenda in the early 2010s, but now it's much less possible to express this kind of direct protest that we're talking about. And even the leftist protest is not necessarily welcome among the kind of the more mainstream oppositional leaders in Russia. So that's why the current scene in Russia is actually resorting to a more subtle protest and a much more subtle and way of decrying the police. And I think that Anatoly is going to explain that better now.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm super excited to see such a large crowd in Vienna. It's a snowstorm right now, so much better than Groningen, I guess. Anyways, so to understand what type of protest we are talking about here, in fact, we need to invoke the Rancière's two logics of human being together. He juxtaposes these two modes of interaction within a society, one of which is the politics and the other one is the police. And of course, since Vyacheslav Morozov is in the audience here with us today, if I say something not entirely accurate about Rancière, I very much welcome him to intervene and participate in this presentation as well. But to understand how these two modes of action are different, we need to go back in time a little bit to the late antiquity. And invoke the conflict that Rancière was also talking about, the conflict between the patricians and the plebeians, the story of the secession of Roman plebeians on the Aventine Hill, and the way that conflict progressed was basically that patricians were within the type of political order that was reinstated, was established in ancient Rome. Patricians were beings with logos, or beings with speech. That is politically meaningful speech, and plebeians were beings that possessed merely voice, and that voice could only convey a sense of pleasure, discomfort, etc. And so, drawing on Ballanche, Rancière poses a question whether there exists a common stage where plebeians and patricians can debate anything. The position of patricians in this case is straightforward. There is no place for discussion with the plebs, for the simple reason that plebs do not speak. They do not speak because they are beings without a name. They are deprived of logos, of certain symbolic enrollment into the city, and whoever is nameless, of course, cannot speak. And so no meaningful linguistic exchange is possible. No setting and no rules of conduct for such a discussion even exist within that political configuration. And so what do the plebeians do in that situation? They do not assume the roles of warriors to fight with the other warriors on the other side, as Scythian slaves had done before them. From their position in that political order, this would have not really done much. This would have not changed the dispositions of roles and statuses. This would not create equality. This would not bring them recognition that they were aspiring for. So instead, they conduct a series of speech acts that mimic those of the patricians. They also give themselves representatives by basically rebaptizing them. They consult with their own oracles and so on and so forth. So in other words, they conduct themselves as being with names, as speaking beings. What they do is basically they claim a place in the symbolic order of the Roman political community, a place that was not there before and still did not actually have any effective power in that configuration, but which actually gained power through the act of its own articulation, through representing a part of no part. Next slide, please, Lisa. This is what Rancière calls politics, distinguishing this from what he calls the police. For him, politics is not everywhere, right? Like Foucault would say, it is the police that is omnipresent for him, but politics is actually a rare thing. To put it differently, in my view, politics for Rancière as well is a form of antagonism which rejects the idea that a political order can be transformed if all the underdogs simply unite and oppose the sovereign order as underdogs. What they need to do, in his view, I think, is to create a new type of agency, which had not been anticipated by the configuration of that sovereign order. So applied to the Russian case, all the currently marginalized liberals and westernizers can protest as much as they want, as Pussy Riot did, for example. But since their position within the current political order is already defined, suppressed, and delegitimized, they would hardly pose any serious challenge to the regime, as we can see today as well. They are a very familiar and systemically disadvantaged target. To actually pose some challenge, to do so, they must invent a new agency that has not been prescribed and proscribed by the existing order. Could I ask the next slide, please? So basically, in a nutshell, our argument is that what we can witness today is a new and potentially way more powerful iteration in the Russian politics of art that brings political confrontation to a qualitatively new level. And as we write here, ideological tenets imposed by the regime become hopelessly old-fashioned and even funny. Basically, we think that this has been a result of an implosion of the formal political sphere when politics, Rancierian politics, and that kind of understanding, it left the sphere of formal politics and entered the sphere of art. Therefore we have this powerful iteration today. And we think that this process might create the conditions of possibility for a new and more radical emancipatory politics. Next slide, please. So how to represent a part of no part, how to expose the constitutive void of the sovereign order. And we have identified 3 strategies, and of course, I mean, these 3 strategies are not entirely and perfectly isolated from each other. We exemplify each strategy by one collective of musical artists, but in fact, of course, all of them somehow engaged in a combination of the 3. But basically, the main mechanism, the way it works here, is that they need to expose the constitutive void of the sovereign order. They need to show that all the performances of power, all the policing activities that are going on are in fact based on nothing. They are based on a constitutive void, and so they need to expose that void somehow. And so the first way of doing this would be to tackle those categories directly by exposing their contingent and sometimes even mythological nature, to debunk the myth of power, if you will. And that's what we see iSpeak is doing very effectively. The second way would be to directly represent the plebs or the subaltern, not as some other that might be feared or pitied, but as an integral part of the new totality. And this is exactly what the plebeians did in the Aventine Hill, when they were representing themselves as a subject, as an equal subject to the sovereign, but at the same time, the type of agency they created was not prescribed, was not anticipated by the configuration of the Roman political order as it was in place. And we see a lot of that going on in Shortparis videos. And finally, foregrounding the living experiences that defy the rigid classifications and prescriptions of the police. And that is what Monetochka doing quite effectively, but I think Lisa will explain a little bit more about it. I would like to first show you a fragment of the video from iSpeak and to talk a little bit about the first strategy. So next slide, please. So
do you want me to just stick with the first slide, or do you want me to show the video first?
No, just this one first. For now, it's just a very short contextualization, basically, who these guys are. It's a collective of 2 people. They produce something which looks like horror rap. They are very much into this aesthetics of death and gloom. They are extremely popular in Russia, but also worldwide. They travel around the world. They, all their YouTube videos, they are extremely popular. The most popular one is Death No More, with 97.5 million views since I checked yesterday. And they all have various subtitles in many languages as well. So they are very internationally friendly, so it is easy to check them out and see what they do. And now we can go to the video, please. So this one, the previous one, was the picture from the Death No More, the most popular clip where they impersonate the communist people of power, and the second one is from marching. But let's watch the marching now.
It's okay?
Yeah, I think that's fine. We don't have time to watch it all, but could I ask for the next slide, please?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically what we see here in the video clip, I think, is very telling and very illustrative of that strategy. So what iSpeak are doing in our understanding is that first of all, of course, I mean, you saw the pioneers and you saw like the marching, you saw the rituals, all very familiar for a Soviet citizen, but also for a current Russian, because all these categories of people, including the pioneers and also the home front workers and also, the traditional families and so on with kids and children, they are yet again presented and idealized as model patriots. And what the iSpeak is doing, first of all, they portray and represent them. They convey the feeling of this pressing conformity that turns into creepy unison, and it's really scary when you actually look at these pioneers singing together. They represent and atomize symbolic binaries. So on the one hand, we see this extreme brutality, and if you actually finish watching the clip until the very end, you will also see a reference to the current Russia, because the military uniforms are current, and also there's a lot of shooting going on, a lot of explosions going on. But what we effectively see is this sharp contrast between shooting, explosions, and violence, and also the theatricality of the whole setting. Because sometimes the guns, they disappear and they're replaced with pointed fingers, and then you see the theater stage and the audience, and of course in the audience you have this a representation of a sovereign sitting and watching how people die. By constructing their video in such a way, what they do is basically appropriating and kidnapping the agency of those who are currently turned into patriotic myths. And the effect that they achieve, in our understanding, is that they manage to desacralize power. They show us that they rely on fake performances, and they therefore show their empty core. And the feeling ones get in the end after watching the clip is that, of course, everything like the state-society dynamics and the power dynamics between the subjects that are supposed to be model patriots and also the sovereigns who are watching them and looking at them from the audience is fake. And that creates a very interesting, liberating effect in our understanding. But now I pass the floor to Lisa, and who will talk about Monetochka and Shortparis.
So it's my turn again, and so the Shortparis, as you would say it in Russian, with Shortparis, and I guess with an English accent, they have Paris in their name for a reason, because they're actually inspired by a lot of French philosophers, and you can actually see sometimes the quotes from, say, André Breton in one of their videos. So when we talk about the kind of musical matters behind the collective, so they actually use quite a bit of techniques that are very Russian. For example, some of their songs actually have this very reminiscent Russian Romance style in them. They make use of recitativo techniques. They experiment a lot with electronic music, but at the same time, it also has a very current hip hop or pop music references as well. Recently, the centrality of their vocalist Nikolai Kamagin is become particularly prominent, and I quite like this description recently that I saw about Shortparis music, because they say that it's very difficult to pin down. It's a bit undescribable, but hopefully you'll be able to make your own impression once I show you a couple of videos. So the video that I wanted to show you now, that we also analyzed in our paper, it's called Strashno, it means dreadful in Russian, and the Arabic subtitles that you see here are actually deliberate. So Shortparis actually had a lot of troubles filming that video, because they filmed that in a school, and the sound and the subtitles are here deliberate. They don't have English subtitles, only the Arabic ones. So I picked a specific moment in the video, but you also can watch it as well at home after the presentation, because it's also in the playlist. So I hope that you now have a better idea of what I'm talking about musically and aesthetically. So what is their politics of aesthetics? Probably, if you're unfamiliar with the Russian context, Shortparis is actually very big on representing the subalternity, especially when it comes to race and class. And you probably noticed the dancers in the video. So they would be racialized in Russia as non-white. They usually a lot of them work as labor migrants, so a lot of them have this kind of stereotypical vests that are associated with hard labor. And this is not the only subaltern class that Shortparis actually represent. Another one would be also especially working class, and their latest video, it's called 20, that we also included in the playlist, shows exactly very similar aesthetic of people who work really, really hard and whose voice is actually very often not heard. And when it comes to this specific video, it's a very powerful reflection on personal and collective trauma. And in this case, it's specifically a reference to the Beslan school hostage crisis that took place in early 2000s that shocked the entire country. And it actually ended up, a lot of children actually died in that hostage-taking crisis. And this is pretty much reflection on that fear of both Islamic terrorism and hostage-taking, and all of these kind of fears bundled together with this one video that says strashno, fear, like you are supposed to be fearful. And a lot of actually people from Russia who commented on that video say, oh, I'm actually feeling like something bad is going to happen, because this is just a combination of so many phobias in the Russian context that it really scares you very deeply. And what Shortparis also do is that they're reimagining aesthetics and structures. So you might have seen also some of this kind of 90s / working class aesthetics that have been reimagined in high fashion as well. Like even in very expensive fashion houses like Vêtements, you also see some of these aesthetics, probably because the fashion designers actually come from the post-Soviet context. And the thing is that even though the Shortparis actually often even quote a lot of their French philosopher inspiration, it's not necessarily read by the Russian audience. Just as, for example, with the Pussy Riot, a lot of people did not really read a lot of this feminist movement, like Riot Girl, or some kind of references to the Western feminist movement in their art. So it's not necessarily readable by the Russian audience, but still, even without that meta text, it still makes it very much outside of the order imposed by the police that Rancière is talking about. So they're definitely reimagining the structures that are currently in place in the Russian state. So another artist that we're talking about is Monetochka. Her real name is Elizaveta Gardymova. And she's probably one of the most underappreciated artists in Russia right now, because for several reasons. So one of the quotes that I really like about her is one of the critics actually said that this absolute child tells you about what is happening around you. And she has the kind of the power, and she's daring as no one else dared before her. And the thing is that she has been dismissed by a lot of critics as music for teenage girls. One of the very prominent Russian musical critics, Artemy Trotsky, for example, said that he's not interested in music for teenage girls when he was asked about to give his opinion about her. She sometimes uses some of the aesthetics of. She very often uses aesthetics of cuteness. She cultivates this kind of very feminine image and voice, and her style is probably fluctuates somewhere between pop rock and indie pop. And here is probably the most representative video here that we have is she doesn't actually have a lot of videos, but this is one that I think that we think is very representative of her art, especially when it comes to reimagining a lot of structures. All right, so you have a taste of Monetochka, and when we talk about her politics of aesthetics, it's it's not a direct, it's not fuck the police opposition to the regime. It's a more ironic messaging towards the regime, even though she has actually said quite a bit of critical things about what is happening in Russia. But she's consciously cultivating a girly image that often leads to the fact that she's being dismissed as this kind of music for girls, which is very unfair to her, especially given her very profound lyrics. And especially in this 90s video that we just showed to you, she's talking a lot about what is the memory of the 90s that we have, like the myths about the 90s that Russians have. And one of the most important things here is that 90s actually is very much actively used by the current Russian government to justify a lot of the things that a lot of the authoritarian reforms that happened after that. So the 90s is like defined as this awful time, and then Putin came and everything became good, to simplify it a little bit. And Monetochka actually takes it to an extreme, and she makes fun of that. And she says that 90s is a time when people killed each other and ran around absolutely naked. So she's really satirizing this this image of the 90s as this completely crazy time. And she's also bringing to the fore her own experience as an individual, as a collective. And she offers this kind of meta position, which is a quote from one of her other songs that is also in the playlist, where she can actually engage with the past and with the present, some of the both nationalistic and anti-Western myths from a critical distance. And this critical distance actually defies any categorizations that are imposed by the police. So I'm going to hand over to Anatoly for our conclusions.
Okay. So yes, unfortunately, you don't have that many subtitles to Monetochka's videos, but and there are some references as well that perhaps cannot be read immediately, because that specific song, for example, was a reference to a cult movie by Balabanov, the brother, from the 1990s as well, and she herself was, of course, born in 1999, if I remember correctly, or something like that. So she was 1 year old. But okay, towards the conclusion, metamodernism à la Russe. What we witness on the example of those three artists, I think, is that there has been a shift from openly antagonistically critical art represented by Pussy Riot and represented by many members of the Russian rap scene, which is still there, but is being suppressed very effectively by the regime. The shift towards a deconstructive manner. So what they are doing, in fact, is they are deconstructing the politics of the Russian regime and the political order that is being imposed by the police, by creating new subjects, by representing the subaltern, and by trying to relive and rethink the foundational myths that the current regime is basically founded on, including the myth about the wild or the dashing 1990s that have been given legitimacy to Putin's government for a very, very long time. And in that, we argue that art can perform a profoundly political work without actually challenging the existing order directly. By directly, I mean literally or semantically here. But by subverting the underlying oppositions and appealing directly to the generic. Also, it is important to mention that this art is distinctly Russian, and most of those people, most of those artists, they insist on that. Both Shortparis and I Speak, for example, started their musical careers singing in English. They are very well integrated into the global cultural scene. They are very much aware of everything that is going on the West, with music, with poetry, with art, and so on and so forth. And this is how they entered this theme. But later on, at one point, and relatively early in their careers, they switched back to Russian. And they started insisting that, in fact, they are a distinctly local experience, and their fight or their playground is at home. And finally, we also wanted to emphasize that this art is actively engaging the audience and is actively engaging the powers that be and subvert the existing order, unlike, for example, was the case, as many people say, in the late 1970s and 1980s. Some of the art that was created there under the tenet of the Soviet regime was also deconstructivist, and also it challenged the regime to some extent, but in many occasions it was also escapist, in a sense that it was based on the values of individualism, it was based on the values of pleasant lifestyle and so on, while what we see here today with Shortparis and also with I Speak and Monetochka is that what they're trying to form a collective, they're trying to form some type of collective subject that could be counterimposed to the existing order prescribed and proscribed by police. But at this point, I should stop, I think, and give our audience the chance to ask questions. Thank you so much for being here and for listening.
Excellent. Let's all open our mics and give a round of applause to our two speakers. Lovely. So some hands are already going up, and that's the way we will handle question session here. We'll take questions in order of raised hands. So if you do have a question, please do raise your hand. If you don't want to speak, you can also put your hand, or not put your hand, you can also put your question in the chat. So we do have a question right away from John Vandevert. John, open your mic. You have the floor.
Great. Can you hear me? Yes. I'll turn on my camera. Why not? Let's see. Just go on. There we go. Thanks so much. Really, really edifying. So I'm currently in my master's year, and I'm actually studying Russian hip hop and nationalism. So this was really very on brand for what I'm studying. So it's really very fascinating. I just have a question regarding two of your points, because my third chapter is on Russianness, and can it be, theoretically understood in more kind of theoretical constructs. And I was wondering if what you had thought about kind of this romanticizing of political opposition into the musical framework itself. I was listening to a lot of the beats, and they're very melodic, very hypnotizing and whatnot. But this popularizing of protest into the musical framework is in its way a type of escapism. You may be talking about very serious threats and very serious topic matter, but the way that it's presented is very much, it prioritizes simple listening, and a lot of the context may be inevitably be lost on those who aren't really aware of the context, even if they are Russian or Slavic of some kind. So I was just wondering how you would go about this type of self-exoticism of Russian music, where it may be political, but it's presented in a way that it de-emphasizes the political to the point where it actually kind of shoots itself in the foot.
If I may, maybe Anatoly also has an opinion on that, but actually there is this trend of sort of romanticizing and exoticizing Russian protest music, because it always has been kind of the focus of Western academic attention. So it's all, oh, let's see what is interesting in Russia. Let's look at the protests, because obviously the pro-governmental stuff is not interesting for most Western researchers. And even now you actually see most of the research actually focus, in fact, on protest art, not necessarily conforming art, because conforming art is not always as interesting as protest art. And there is, I mean, even you were looking into hip hop and rap music. So, for example, Timothy, you might be familiar with him. He actually did record a song, so actually a couple of songs, in favor of the Russian regime. And if you take a look at his song that was supposed to bolster Putin's re-election campaign, it's well, it's bad. It's very subservient. And when you actually see, because rap and hip hop is such a, a very much oppositional, as you can see also with NW, it's always, it's a critique. It's an opposition to the regime. And when it is supposed to serve the regime, it creates this massive cognitive dissonance in the perception of it as a genre, I would say, at least. So when you actually, especially hear Timothy's song about about Putin, it's ridiculous. Even people who are commenting on that song on YouTube, they're like, this does not make any sense whatsoever. And yes, we do romanticize a lot of the protest music, but I just think that a lot of it is just so, there's just so much pressure on a lot of these artists that it's difficult not to empathize with them because of the kind of actual police that they have to deal with. So Anatoly, maybe you want to add.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, John. I wouldn't call it romanticization. I would rather call it a combination of different sensory messages that create a certain mood or vibe. And for example, the type of mood and vibe that Shortparis creates or iSpeak creates in their videos is anything but easy and romantic, I would say. And they actually, they play on that a lot through presenting these paradoxical combinations of very kind of soft voice and very light music with very, very powerful political messages and very powerful collective traumas. They create an impression that is not necessarily romantic, at least to my taste. Second of all, what Lisa mentioned, I just wanted to add a little bit that yes, there are limits, of course, even for what iSpeak are doing. Their concerts has been cancelled multiple times, and they have been detained for several days or for several hours, I don't remember, in the police station as well. So there's only that much that one can do and that much that one can say. And once we deal with the situation of authoritarian pressure, then what are the ways out? And usually, in my understanding, and also speaking comparatively, and I drew a comparison with the 1980s and how it was taken back then, the most powerful weapon when you are facing an insurmountable enemy is laughter, is irony, is sarcasm sometimes, right? And sometimes that sarcasm is not necessarily right into your face. It is more nuanced than that. And this is what Alexei Yurchak, for example, called the culture of stёb, or the culture of over-identification with the regime, to the point when it is actually difficult to say whether or not the person who is over-identifying with the regime is being serious or is mocking that specific regime. And that is why I think that this is an iteration of that when you look at it and you don't get it from the very first point, from the very first glance, but at the same time, once you think further about it, you realize that it is in fact much more powerful and much more undermining than a direct confrontation a la Pussy Riot.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I thought I wrote down stёb as you were talking, and just was very interesting to hear you say that, a very distinctly Russian subject, or kind of a very distinctly Russian technique, as I haven't really seen stёb very much in kind of the American perspective. It does seem very much rooted in the Russian culture. So thank you very much.
Oh, I mean, the same Alexei Yurchak has a co-authored article about American stёb, so I'm sure it is not distinctly Russian.
Okay, Dr. Schiller, go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to formulate a question, and Anatoly, I think you started answering it, so I thought it was time to ask it. Your concept of metamodernism, you brought it up and it's in your title, but you didn't really conceptualize it. So I wonder how you conceptualize it, what you think about it. For me, metamodernism is very much tied to post-irony, in the sense that it is so ambiguous that it's both ironic and distancing and mocking, while at the same time also being serious. So these two modes that usually would exclude each other in the postmodern understanding of irony, but in metamodernism, they sort of come together and become really complicated. And I don't know enough about the cultural context, and just from what you're saying, I do think that seems to be happening here. And Anatoly, you started answering that a little bit. How do these two modes come together here? What is being ridiculed while at the same time being serious also? Maybe can you be a bit more precise with the videos that we saw, how this is happening, so to say, because there's so much going on. I don't understand the lyrics, so maybe you can give us a few examples of how these two things come together?
Mm-hmm. Lisa, would you like to talk about this on the example of Monetochka? Or I can start with just saying that for us, we indeed do not really conceptualize metamodernism in that article. For us, it is a response to people who write about metamodernism in Russia and who actually criticize that turn, that recent turn. They who see it as a betrayal of protest art, who see it as a going away from direct confrontation and therefore a certain weakening of the protest. And so we simply say that, look, what you call metamodernism is in fact more serious and is in fact more real and is in fact potentially even more powerful than, at least in the given conditions, compared to what we had before. But with the mocking, I think, Lisa, you spoke about this on the example of the 90s very, very nicely. So maybe we could reiterate that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I think that at least the way we wrote the article, the way we also conceptualize the whole thing is that we pretty much see this metamodernism in this mission of deconstructing the binaries. And sort of trying to locate a platform for solidarity for the Russian population in some way, and this is, I think, was probably the most important part of the metamodernism understanding that was relevant for us, especially with in the context of Rancière's work, is that we're doing away the old binaries and we're trying to create something new. And this is what this kind of rethinking that what all of the artists are doing is what's extremely relevant here. And especially with Monetochka, who never actually experienced the 90s herself, and she's kind of exaggerating, making fun of all of these ways that the Russian government is trying to get the population to imagine the 90s, how bad it was. And that's why, and as Anatoly said, like the legitimacy of the Russian government right now comes in primarily, at least, through the bad 90s. So she's really throwing a lot of shade on the 90s narrative and trying to explain how it does not make any sense. It's not possible that everyone was killing each other. It's not possible that everyone was running around buck naked. And it's not possible there was no electricity, no food, no nothing. So we didn't show the full video here, but it actually turns really dark. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it turns way darker. But she's also, especially this kind of contradiction that she's using, this very girly, very soft feminine voice, and then this kind of, well, people are killing each other. So this kind of contradiction is also something that is again, this creates this something unfamiliar also for a lot of Russian ears, because usually, okay, a woman, you sing about something nice, and that's why she's been dismissed as music for teenage girls. And this kind of confrontation of the really hard reality and this femininity is also something that exposes this kind of marginalization of female voice as well in the Russian context. So if you're a woman, you're supposed to sing about female things, but no, she's actually singing about very deeply political things. She's has very profound poetry, but it's been dismissed because of that, because she has this feminine image. So this is something that's very important for us, and for again Rancière, who's also would reimagine this her as this marginalized figure, and she has a new voice to talk about reimagining of the structures that existed.
And just to add one little point, if you're looking for something like this in other artists, for example, Shortparis, I mean, one of my favorite videos is, I don't know if it is in the playlist, but if it is not, it should be, I guess, is Coco, which has and like the second name of the video is The Structures Don't March in the Streets, which is a famous slogan of 1968, and they're playing with the slogan at a chicken factory. They are staging this extremely hilarious performance there, when people are just like singing something, and then eggs are falling out of their mouths, and they're impersonating roosters and march like that. But at the same time, if you actually read deeper, you realize that they are dead serious. That this is a model metaphor for a political reawakening of the subaltern. And if you know a little bit about the history of the Russian literature, for example, from the 1990s, you would remember that there is this novel that was written by Pelevin about Hermit and Sixto, about two chickens in a chicken factory who, like, first of all, they don't understand what's going on, what's happening, and then gradually, they sort of they come to realize, they wake up to realize the sinister mission of that specific context for their kind, and they fly away. But that's very funny and very, very serious at the same time. I highly recommend that video.
Seems to give me a good sense of how they're using metamodernism. Do you have a follow-up, Dr. Schiller, or is that that's good? Okay, let's go to Hugo next.
Yes, thank you first for a very interesting talk here. During the first part of this talk, my mind started wandering back to November 2019, when I was lucky enough to see a live show by Pussy Riot and a live show by Shortparis here in the Netherlands. And I started wondering, when I was seeing this show of Pussy Riot, they are some kind of symbol for Russian opposition here in the West. And they've almost become institutionalized here as the musical act against the Russian government here. And I was wondering, in what way did Pussy Riot influence or shape a way for those kind of second wave of artists, including an act like Shortparis, to voice their concerns with the Russian government and to voice their political statements? Because it feels like Pussy Riot had some impact on that, of course, but I'm not sure in what way. So I was wondering what thoughts you had on this.
If I may start here a little bit. So the problem with Pussy Riot, and that's also what we touched upon in the presentation, is that their art is not necessarily received well by the general populace. So if you take a look at the public opinion polls, which again have their bias, but there's still there is no broader solidarity with their art or with their message, and that's why, in some way, probably I may be wrong, but I think it's one of the reasons that their protest was not necessarily embraced in Russia specifically, because there's just not a lot of this solidarity that that the people could identify with. So and because that's why the music that we're talking about right now, that's makes it also interesting, because the kind of messages that they are embracing are a bit closer to the general population, to the subalterns that have not really been heard before. So I would say that Pussy Riot is I guess, a more of a convenient figurehead for Russian protest music for a lot of Western listeners, but it might not necessarily actually reflect the fears and the aspirations of the actual subaltern in the Russian context. But Anatoly, correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't have anything to correct. I just think that if you ask me, I think the continuity is there especially since you are talking about these two collectives, Pussy Riot and Shortparis. I think that they are connected quite well, and the way they're connected is, of course, through quite openly leftist ideology, the way they, imagine community, the way they mobilize collectives, the way they speak for distribution, the way they represent the subaltern, and so on and so forth. The difference, however, is that Shortparis has changed their mode of representation and their mode of interaction with the regime. While Pussy Riot was confronting the regime much more directly, Shortparis is being, I hesitate to use the word smarter than that. Perhaps they are a little bit more nuanced, or they engage in a different type of political activity. And of course, this is dictated by the circumstances in which they are creating their art, of course, because Pussy Riot still could afford some of those things back in the 2010 and 2012. But if you transport it into the current context, something like this would have been already unthinkable. On the Red Square, for example, it is not only forbidden to do manifestations, but it is also forbidden to even take your cameras out. So I mean, you can, or like take a flag or take a poster or something. If you just stand up there with a poster, you are immediately grabbed by the police, and only then they see, okay, so what's wrong with that, and whether you need to be sent to prison or you can just be let go.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Okay, next is Vyacheslav.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, yes, I'm very glad that I was in the audience, because I was trying to also listen to this as as an audience, as a member of the audience, and it sounded great, at least to me. But of course, maybe just because I'm very much in the background and in this music and so on. So, but yes, I'm quite happy with how it works. Also looking at it a bit from the side. But I just wanted to make a couple of points to add to what Eliza and Anatoly were saying in response to the questions mostly. On Pussy Riot, my point would be, okay, it's probably not a good thing to say about people who actually did prison terms, being directly prosecuted by the regime, but at the same time, I see it as a commercial project, which is oriented almost explicitly now towards the Western audience. They left Russia, and they're doing pretty well commercially on the Western market, and they no longer care, I think, about what's going on in the country. Maybe I'm being a little bit too blunt, but that's how I see it, at least. And also, from the very beginning, this art was definitely not for the people. It was mostly for pro-Western liberal community, which easily got the message. And the message was not even, there was no need even to decipher the message, because the message was very blunt. And this is exactly the conceptual point that I would like to make here. In addition to everything that has been said so far, I think there are a couple of things in Rancière which are particularly relevant. One is his opposition to critical art. He is definitely against it, because he thinks that critical art, in this very direct paradigm, a la Pussy Riot, is something that art should not do. Instead of challenging the sovereign directly, art should simply show that other ways of experiencing reality are possible, other ways of imagining reality are possible, and by doing that, and this is, I think, exactly what the three performers that we discussed do. By doing that, art actually shows the contingency of the existing order, and that's the possibility of change, and that's a fundamental point that is extremely important for the relationship between politics and aesthetics, in Rancière at least, but of course all the three of us very much share this position. And so politics of aesthetics in Rancière is exactly about that. It's not about being political in any explicit way. And by the way, I just found it in our manuscript that Nastya Kreslina, who is the voice of Ice Tree Peak, actually says it explicitly in one of the interviews. She says that, she says basically, if I suddenly have a desire to engage in politics, I will do that. We will express ourselves in a different way, but not. She clearly differentiates between artistic expression and political expression. But nevertheless, there is a connection, and this connection is important to highlight, and this is what our work is about. But I'll probably shut up here, and thank you very much for the great presentation.
Okay, so we do have half an hour left for discussion. It's great to have so much time to talk these issues through. There's no other hands up, and oh, has anything been added to the chat that I missed, Dr. Schiller? No, just some goodbyes so far. Especially the students in the Music, Politics, and Resistance course, if you can formulate a question, it's good practice to offer it in these sessions, but I'll ask a question now. I've used Rancière in my work quite a bit as well. And from my reading of Rancière, it seems that his definition of politics is embedded with this notion of the police, and that which is not policed, that which is not removed from the domain of the visible and sensible, as he says, doesn't sort of qualify as political art. You've told us a little bit about how that's happening to these groups that you presented. You mentioned Ice Peak having concerts shut down and being detained. Can you tell us more about the actual efforts that are being made to sort of remove them from the domain of the visible, audible, and sensible?
Yeah, so things that with Shortparis, it's they have been having concerts sporadically, so they are part of the part of the visual and sensual, and they even performed their actually a couple of their songs in a very popular Russian late night show called Вечерний Ургант. But I don't know whether it was by accident or not, but there was one of the key lines in their song that was about the major walking on, and they actually the line did not actually appear in that performance only until the very last verse. So, and when we actually watched it, when I watched it several times, I go, was that on purpose? Was it like self-censorship, or was it just like in the heat of the moment that they forgot, that the singer forgot to sing it? And so they do have some kind of name recognition, but I kind of went ahead and asked my parents whether they know any of the collectives, and so my parents do not know Shortparis, they don't know I Speak, but they do know Monetochka, and yeah, she was dismissed as, oh yeah, that little fool. Yeah, so as you can imagine, that there's not necessarily a lot of this, there's not a lot of name recognition, but again, like generation-wise, it also might be a factor. But I think that I Speak had way more troubles with their concerts though than Shortparis. Monetochka is, I think it's more recognizable. Also, I think she's more, I guess, consumable in terms of musically, I think. And a lot of her, for example, the 90s actually, I mean, you could also compare it with, let's say, Lizzo's Juice or something like that. So like this kind of vintagey sound and aesthetics. So yeah, in that case, I would say that Monetochka is more easily recognizable because she's probably more digestible by the more general public.
But when it comes to the actual pressure that is being exerted on the artists, we mentioned the concert being cancelled. In general, to understand how this works, I think it helps to understand how the regime works in general, and what is the interaction between the high officials, the lower officials, the musicians, those who criticize the regime, and so on. Because Putin's regime creates an impression of a very centralized and strong regime where nothing happens without Putin's approval. But I think that the realities are very much different, and a lot of what is happening on the ground in local clubs, in local concert halls, and so on is in fact a consequence of the zeal of local officials and heads of directors of whatever, and that what makes the direct types of censorship extremely problematic in that specific case, because if you follow what's going on right now in Russia, there is a number of stand-up comedians whose concerts have been cancelled recently and continue to be cancelled. And when we try to understand why exactly their concerts are cancelled, then usually it is very easy to pinpoint a certain video that they have posted, or a certain thing that they said during one of their concerts, for example, joking about Navalny, or saying something about Putin that he really wouldn't like in this very humiliating manner, and so on. And once that is pinpointed, then you can actually see, oh, that is why their concerts were cancelled. In case of I Speak, Shortparis, and Monetochka, they are elusive. They evade this categorizations. It is very difficult to put them into a specific box and say that, oh, we need to in fact cancel their concert or do something about them because they are saying that Putin is bad, or because they are saying that Alexei Navalny must be freed, and so on. And in this sense, yeah, this is how they work. This is how they function, and the regime cannot really reach that depth. But at the same time, of course, since the regime is relying on arbitrary law enforcement, then anything can happen, and things happen, of course. And so it is not impossible that they would be shut down just because some high official actually saw them.
Thanks. That's really useful context. Our students have not formulated a question yet. I see no raised hands. I'm going to extra pressure them to do that. And you can even ask about connections between your own research that you're doing and what these scholars might think about. The connections between their work and your work. I'll ask another question since that hasn't happened yet. You brought up two things actually I was wondering about. One is the music itself. You talked about one artist being more consumable in terms of the kinds of sounds that she was using, and the voice is something I'm really concerned with in my own research. I found the voices very interesting in these examples, the way that sort of clear, I think you use the word romantic style singing is being used in some of these, in some of this music. Can you talk about the sounds themselves more, and maybe specifically the voices, and how the voices might read to a Russian audience?
I have to say that I have a musical school education, not like a conservatory education. So I will just kind of reflect on that from my, classical Russian music education. And so I think that especially when it comes to Shortparis, Kamyagin's voice has definitely this references to traditional Russian Romance music. Like there's this kind of 19th century Russian songs that about love usually. So I would say that especially the segment that I showed really showcases this type of melodic singing that is very much present in those Russian romances. Also, in some ways, it also has this kind of Russian Orthodox religious music references as well. So actually, you can hear that a lot through the way he sings. It also sometimes has this references to some of the traditional church, well, not really hymns, but like church traditional Russian church music. When it comes to Monetochka, I think that she sounds like vocally, actually, she sounds like as a very much traditional Russian pop star from the 90s. And actually, at the beginning of the 90s video, I didn't show that, but there was a CD of a singer called Natalia Vetlitskaya. So she was like this very beautiful Russian pop star from the 90s, who I think she came out as an anti-vaxxer these days. So yeah, but in any case, so in the 90s, she was this really popular kind of traditionally feminine, sexy lady with this kind of not particularly big operatic voice, but a very, like something nice to hear, to listen to. And I think that, well, it's my impression, and based on some of the interviews that Monetochka gave, I think that she does emulate some of that vocal aesthetics as well from the 90s, even though ironically she never actually lived through them. But she also, in her songs, she also mentioned some of the other kind of very popular 90s bands like Laskavy Mai, which is like a very, very, I don't know, like a lot of people would also consider like a trashy music that was very popular in the 90s. So she mentions Laskavy Mai, which is also kind of a very, again, I mean, there's a notion of class there as well. So because a lot of people would not admit that they would listen to Laskavy Mai because it's like an issue of something, oh yeah, it's a lower class music type of thing. So again, this is, and I think it's an issue of class that also comes into this music taste you're probably familiar with. And as for I Speak, I'm not sure I have, like musically, I think that it's very unusual for, I think, for a Russian musical scene. And if you, especially when it comes to the voice, again, the female singer, she also has this kind of very traditional Russian singing quality to it. And actually, a lot of the some of the vocal experts actually say that there's like a Russian defect in the singing when you have like your singing is actually too deep into your throat. And I was told that also repeatedly as well. So my singing is way too deep, but it should like come out a bit further down. But a lot of Russian singers, because of the language, it's actually a bit deeper in our throats. So yeah, but I think that she definitely also embodies a lot of this kind of traditional some of the singing part that you listened to, that you heard as well. So she was kind of going really high with her voice, and not necessarily kind of singing with the diaphragm, but actually relying more on her larynx and throat.
Do you see that as an important part of their power? The fact that these vocal timbres are so familiar for a wider swath of the public, and that might invite them in more to this music?
It's a tough question. I'd say that for Monetochka, definitely, because she kind of evokes a sense of unfamiliarity in that regard. With Shortparis, I think that their music is this kind of vocal familiarity is a bit more vague, and that's why it's more difficult to kind of connect with it. With I Speak, I think I don't know. I'm not sure that. I think yes, like some of the singing that she does actually can definitely reminds me of some of this traditional some of the songs from Russian fairy tales, where you have like animated fairy tales in Russian, and like there's like this usually this very passive woman whose name is usually Nastya for some reason, and she's like has this very small voice, and she's talking like that, and she's like looking for the male to save her. So there's this kind of vocal quality. So I can hear that in her voice, but obviously this is a very stark contrast of what she's singing about and what they're embodying with their art as well.
Yeah, actually, one of the singers, popular singers from the 90s, was an invited guest for the video clip. Tatiana Bulanova was also singing there, if you noticed her. I wanted to make a short comment about your point about the clarity of the voice, that you can actually hear the words, and it's about the content of the words as well, and not just about the sound of the voice. I think that this is also this is reminiscent of the processes that were taking place in Russian music in late Soviet times as well, because to be a musician in the Soviet Union, you had to have a degree, you have to work in a philharmonic hall or some whatever, you have to be part of the union. Anyone could not be a musician, and therefore it was also difficult to buy instruments, to buy high quality musical equipment. And that is why the type of music that was produced, especially underground in late Soviet times, was relying very much on the quality of the lyrics. It was poetry as much as it was music, and that is because most of the concerts, they were taking place in the apartments, and they didn't have nice equipment, they didn't have nice instruments, and so on, and so they had to rely on the voice and the singing. And I see the continuity here. I think that in general, when you listen to Russian music, when you speak about it, the content of the words is important. The words themselves are heard really well, and that's why it's there. And I think it resonates with the public, because this is how they are used to listen to music.
Very valuable context. Thanks for those answers. Dr. Schiller, you have the floor.
I think Jacqueline was before me.
That's not true, but Jacqueline, you can go next.
Okay. Maybe just more important then.
No, it's fine if you'd like to go, but I'll just take the floor now so we don't have to waste more time. But thank you both for the presentation. I think this is a very interesting piece. I think working with these musicians together is just very interesting when it comes to contemporary Russian politics. But my question, I guess I have two. One is a bit brief and more concise, and the other I'm still trying to figure out. So the more, let's say, scattered question is this kind of approach you have with the politics of aesthetic. because I'm trying to also understand how that leads to the promotion of, as you ended the presentation with, a collective subject, right? And that the argument that maybe these three can promote this kind of thing. And I'm wondering if your theory can support, or if you can just clarify this, how the promotion can happen when it's also, I guess, not necessarily the aim of these groups, right? Like you said, they navigate this kind of in-between space. So if you're navigating an in-between space, if you're able to kind of avoid the attention of the government or something like this, how are you also doing promotion? Is it promotion by negative, like negation, I guess, is kind of my question, if that makes sense. I'm still working on it, but so my more straightforward question though would be, Lisa, if I may, when you're talking about Shortparis and their movies or video Strashna, I remember you mentioned how you kind of look at race and class, and I was wondering if also you had a discussion, the three co-authors, if you had a discussion about this also gender aspect or queer aspect. You mentioned also how you were trying to not necessarily fall into a binary, but I was wondering, because for me in this video, there was a really clear scene at one point where the singer has this very large earring, and he also looks directly at the camera. And and for me, it was such an interesting moment because I'd never seen something quite like that. And I've seen some analysis about Shortparis, but I haven't seen necessarily exploration. So I was just wondering if you could explain why you maybe didn't delve into this, if you have plans to, or if also I just saw this and it stayed in my mind, but it's not necessarily a trend. So thank you again.
So to answer the gender question, yes. So we didn't really dive a lot into the gender aspect there, but I think that they definitely consciously cultivating also the kind of a ambiguously queer aesthetic there to because obviously in Russia you also have the legislation against, the ban on propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations among minors. So you're not supposed to propagate it for minors. So I think that this kind of nod to the camera was definitely also a reference to that, especially with the earrings and the kind of androgyny. But I think there's actually another video that we did not include in the playlist, which it's called actually About Love, and it's actually about objectification of women. So they are definitely concerning themselves with the notion of gender, but their videos are mostly about, I would say, at least in my opinion, they're usually centered on the kind of the working class or racialized minorities, not necessarily gendered gender minorities. So, but if you take a look at I will send them a link to the video About Love, and then it starts with like a zoom into the female breast, and then like it kind of zooms out and then kind of talks about the nature of love and how women are treated. And so I think that they definitely think about that, but it's less obvious than the discussion of race and class, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I also think that they're taking it seriously and they're trying to delve into it. One of the moments, for example, in my favorite video, the Coco, and Lisa pointed that out, as I perhaps from my position could not see that immediately, but in the very end of the video, when people are storming out of the factory, and there are only men there, even though there are women in the video clip as well. And so we've been thinking about it. So why is it there? What does it have to do with anything? And apparently one of the versions was that, in fact, if it is indeed a chicken factory, and if it is indeed, related to certain prototypes in the literature and so on, then most likely it is connected to the idea that on chicken factories, chickens are sexed. So in a sense that the female chicken, they are used for the production of eggs, and a male chicken, they are sacked immediately for meat. And this is the type of collective subject that they are sort of freeing in the video clip. But with regards to creating collective subjects, your first question, I think that it is very useful to have this contrast between the type of art and music that the Shortparis and Monetochka and I Speak are doing, and contrast it with Pussy Riot, for example, as well, the same thing. So, in fact, what they are doing here is that they are trying to resonate on several different levels. So they are giving you the aesthetic message, they are giving you the message that relates to your own and communal type of experience that everyone has been living through, like the 90s, like this type of aesthetics, this type of music, and so on. It gives you the poetic message, which is immediately relevant to the currently extremely popular rap genre in Russia, which is the new thing right now. And of course, it also includes the political component in it. So in this sense, they are much more resonant when it comes to the power of that kind of art. And I remember once a comedian was asked, what is the secret of a viral joke, how to create a viral joke? And the answer was that, well, in order to create a viral joke, you need to make it so that this joke appeals to everyone, regardless of their class, regardless of their gender, regardless of their social position, regardless of their profession, and so on and so forth. And it is not necessary that all these different groups and classes and people read exactly the same message from that joke. And I think that what Monetochka, for example, is doing is brilliant in this regard, because in fact, it is a girlish music. I mean, it is fun to listen. It is nice. It is melodic. It is romantic and everything. But it has the added advantage of actually also being political. And that message does not necessarily have to be immediately read by the audience, as Lisa has mentioned before.
I saw Jacqueline mouth thank you, I think. That's good. Seems she's pleased with the answer. Dr. Schiller, would you like the floor back then?
Peter, do you still have a question? Because mine is really not that important,
Okay.
only if we have time.
Yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant because I didn't read the article. So my question might
It's
be...
not published yet. It's under review, so it's okay.
Oh, okay. And I don't know these case studies necessarily, so I have to look at it myself again. But I did engage with Rancière before, also from my own research on protest movements, and I know there's a lot of debate on the applicability of Rancière's philosophical ideas, because they are in the end abstract philosophical ideas. And I see also maybe a little bit of a conceptual slippage when you refer to police and then actually sometimes mean just police, and that's not what Rancière means. I mean, there's also a positive function of the police and a necessary function of the police that you cannot go around. So fuck the police or going against the police and subvert it is almost impossible, I think, within Rancière's thinking, because it's an order that is based on consensus, and that keeps people, of course, in their in their place. Also, there's no way to maybe even have this revolutionary moment of class struggle, within that order. So I do understand what you're trying to say, but I also think sometimes you are just meaning police as this manifestation, this physical thing, and that you see, reflected in many other things, but that is not necessarily always what Rancière means. Maybe I'm wrong, but I was just thinking through Ataï. I don't know if you know this scholar in musicology as well, and also a philosophical thinker, because I see also a lot of police in, again, the musical structures or the way the music is structured. So maybe that's another way also to relate to this basis of this order that always is there, and that even in the composition you are dealing with, that they kind of reflect on dynamics of power by reiterating even some of these orders through rhythm, through the organization of sound, basically. Do you engage with that, or is this another perspective?
I can reply to the first one about the police. Thank you so much for this intervention here. We definitely need to look closer at certain elements of that argument that we present there. On my part, I would say that perhaps it might seem this way, but I don't think that we are referring to the police as the regime or the existing regime, rather that we are referring to the police as the order, as you rightly pointed out, of course. And in that sense, Pussy Riot is part of the police as well, because they have their place and they have their voice from within that order, and they can, in fact, juxtapose their messages that, in fact, fall very, very neatly into the logic of that order, because, of course, that order is built on the idea of anti-Westernism, on traditional values, on the idea that feminism is bad, and so on and so forth. And once you kind of oppose that by promoting your messages through punkish artistic performance that is also being viewed as something very marginal inside that context. When you do this on the stage, or like in the altar of the church, which is also a sacred thing for that specific order, then you are playing along with the logic of the police. And in that sense, we simply see that perhaps Monetochka, I Speak in Shortparis are doing something qualitatively different here, and this is what we're trying to emphasize. Lisa, would you like to?
Yeah, so if there's conceptual slippage, it's my fault, because I was so wrapped up into the, the kind of the analogy between the fuck the police and the NWA and all this kind of connection that we were building within our article, because it was pretty much, I mean, we're trying to convey the message that all of these artists are obviously want to do away with the Rancière's police, not the actual police, although they actually suffer from the police incursions in general. So I mean, we did not really engage with the musicologist literature in our article, but I think that if I remember correctly from Anatoly, it was about sacrificing and the political economy of music, right? So it was something about the sacrificing of themselves. So I think that this is definitely a lot about the sacrificing, and it was in part related to Pussy Riot, because they did sacrifice themselves and served 2 years in prison. And yeah, so this kind of in many, I think that all of these artists are aware of the fact that they could become a sacrifice as well in the setting. But maybe Vyacheslav would. Vyacheslav is the Rancière expert, so maybe Vyacheslav would like to correct us on that.
No, I would just add actually that even "fuck the police" is not necessarily against. I mean, yes, literally in that original song, that was probably mostly against the police as the police force. But at the same time, you do not have to read it in that way, right? Because the title is also intentionally subversive and kind of, well, I don't know. What's the word? Not necessarily confrontational, but sort of trying to, in a certain sense, invite a reaction, and that reaction can be different depending on where you are. And yeah, I mean, we can double check, but I think we make it clear in the text itself that it's not the actual law enforcement that is the case here. Yes, but thank you for this observation.
Okay, maybe we do have time for that unimportant question to close, Melanie?
Sure. Okay. Well, thinking from my own research, I'm looking at right-wing populist music in Europe, specifically in Sweden, and they consider their music to be protest music as well. And one of the things that I noticed in this kind of music is that it is often creating associations of naivete or childishness. And maybe I'm too focused on that right now, but I also think I noticed that certainly with the last example that you gave, the third one, you emphasized a lot that she's presenting herself as this sort of harmless girl. But also with the I Speak example, that maybe it's a coincidence, but it also sounded like a children's song, right? This la 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 la. And I wonder if this is relevant in other examples, or if it's just coincidence, or if this is one of the ways how these artists play with the ambiguity of we're just playing here, we're not saying anything, we're not opposing anything, we're, this sort of undermining the categories through play. Is that at all relevant in the other cases, or is it just a coincidence?
I think it is relevant. I think it is very relevant. I think that the form of engagement with politics that they have, and also the type of messages they promoted, it would be very difficult to imagine the same type of messages being promoted in this kind of dead serious phase. And childification of that, I think, is one of the ways to actually emphasize that boundaries are not set here. We're sort of serious, but then also not serious. We are, at the same time, very, very serious. But then again, if we say what we say with a different face, or if we say what we say with, like, being very, I don't know the word, but that would be also easily interpolated by the regime. And I think that yes, that is definitely something special. I mean, done on purpose. Sorry.
Thanks,
Okay.
really interesting. Yeah.
Lisa's not opening her mic, so I guess she's happy with your with your answer, Tolik. Excellent. So before we bring this to the close, I just want to promote another Music Matters event. We have another one tomorrow at 1 o'clock, not on Google Meets, but it's on Blue Jeans. You can find the information on the Music Matters website and Facebook page. Millie Taylor will be giving a talk called Who Tells Your Story? Music Theater in the UK and the Netherlands. So we hope you can make it to that as well. This was an incredibly rich discussion, such an important topic to address. So I'm really pleased with this session. Let's open our mics one more time and thank our speakers for joining us today.
Thank you for great questions.
And thank you, Dr. Schiller, for organizing the session, and thank you all for being here.